Thanks for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast series, where we profile those who have overcome or are in the process of overcoming a life event. We have three objectives with this podcast series. The first is we want you to know you're not alone in whatever you're experiencing in a life encounter. We want you to know that we're here to help you through it, help you to think into it, and help you overcome whatever it is you're experiencing. Our second objective is to help you develop the resolve that there are multiple solutions to any life encounter. It's just a matter of thinking into and thinking through any situation you are encountering to develop the various options and various solutions that any life encounter has. Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're experiencing a life challenge because of a decision you made sometime in the past that if you had a life redo, you would like to make a different decision, we want to help you with critical thinking skills such that you can think into and think through any situation to review all the facts and factors involved with making a decision such that we can help you reach a very informed decision. I'm Ron Cooper, founder of the Cooper Culture. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty. Together, we are the Cooper Culture, and the Cooper Culture is sponsoring this podcast series. Today, we feature Dan Bartol, who is a recovering drug addict, and he is now celebrating 9 years of freedom. And he has a very interesting story of life experiences that got him into the situation that he encountered, but is now free. Marty, what are some takes that our listeners can take from this?
Dan shared with us his first dependence on alcohol. That was just the first thing that he started taking. The alcohol helped him calm his anxiety and helped with the disconnect feeling he had with his friends.
And the disconnect was a need for relationships he felt he did not have, but he was able to overcome that after having gone through a period of 16 years or so as a drug-dependent person, but found a long-term source in a relationship with God. He explains that it's through the Lord that he was able to overcome his challenge of the drug addiction. So let's listen together and learn about Dan's experience and what he is doing to live this alcohol-free life that he's now enjoying. And he's with the Recovery Centers of America, RCA, where he is helping others to avoid and overcome what he went through in life. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. You've got a very interesting story that our listeners will want to know about. Can you share with our listeners just, kind of in a top-level summary form, where you've been, what you're doing, and we're going to put a focus on what you've learned from the past and how we may help some others. So welcome aboard, Dan.
Hey, guys, first of all, thanks for having me out. Yeah, so a little bit about, where I'm at. So I'm currently, right now, 40 years old. I work for a company called Recovery Centers of America. There's a bunch of our sites located throughout the United States. That's where I'm at currently. I mentioned that I'm 40 years old. Let me tell you a little bit about my background, and then we'll get going. What led me to work in this career? Started to drink when I was 15 years old, and I got sober at 31. So that's 16 years, and there's a lot that's still into those 16 years. But that's 16 years of partying and some chemical substances that I like to ingest that put me down, a pretty dark, scary path, to be honest with you. I did have a what I like to call like a coming moment when I was 31 years old, and luckily it happened for me, and I was able to change my life around at 31. And I can say that I person in long-term recovery, and come July 9th, God willing, I get there. It'll be 9 years of continuous sobriety. So, that's a very brief synopsis of where I got what I got here, and I'm sure we can delve in and out of that throughout the conversation.
Congratulations on the 9 years of being clean And I'm very curious, Dan, can you think back to age 15 or earlier? Can you describe what it was that, if there was feelings of insecurity, if there were just feelings of not knowing if you fit or whatever it is? I'm not trying to suggest anything, but can you tell our listeners, as you think back, what it was that you felt drugs and alcohol and so forth satisfied that you did not have at that time in your life?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Not sure if it was inadequacies or insecurities, but I can remember from an early age, I had a brain that just wouldn't stop running. From the time I woke up to the time I was going to bed, probably even as I was sleeping, I always felt that my brain was continuously running. I can remember as far back as 8 years old, walking up to my friend's house and knocking on the door, and all I wanted to do was go play with my best friend at the time who lived across the street. His name was Jason. But even at 8 years old, I can remember vividly walking up and I would rehearse in my head what I was going to say when I got to the door. Right, so my brain was constantly running. So I'm walking up to Jason's house just to see. At 8 years old, we're going to go out and play stickball or street hockey, But the entire walk, my brain just not stopping. Here's what I'm going to say. Here's how I'm going to say it. Here's what I'm going to, and just having that anxiety-filled, looking back on it, anxiety-filled conversation in my head. So I can remember that as far back as I was 8, and then around 15, 16, just to give you a little. Background of when I started drinking and stuff like that. So I'm around 15 or 16 years old. My parents went through a divorce at the time. It's commonplace. And that didn't make me like a drug addict or an alcoholic. But what it did, Ron, it gave me a built-in excuse, right, to act a certain way. And what I mean by that is I would start to say these things, and I did that from the time I was 15 to 31. And I would say, you would drink like me if, right? And at the time I'm 15, I'm 16 years old, and it would be like, well, you would drink like you would do this too if your parents divorced, right? And then I'm 20, and I'm doing, well, of course I can drink like this. I can drink like this because. So what that did at 15 or 16 years old, I had a built-in excuse ready to justify me drinking and doing drugs, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm going to tell you, it does. I can understand it academically. And for our listeners, Dan, Marty and I are consummate outsiders, so to speak. We've never developed a taste for alcohol. We've never done drugs. So I am the kind of person that is trying to assess without stigmatizing or labeling anybody. But if there is anyone with the propensity to go the route you did, to just help by engaging in that person's life early on. So what I'm hearing, Dan, is that you had anxiety to whatever degree, and you had a very active brain, which tells me, and you and I can identify in some ways, man, I always want to try something new, something different, and I can think of things that I've done that were, in hindsight, extremely stupid, but I never got involved in drugs, and I never seriously hurt myself. But is that part of your background, Dan, that as you look back, that you were just very inquisitive, the brain is always active, you had a built-in excuse with your mom and dad's divorce, and all of these things? Is that kind of put together and led you into the life that you're coming out of?
So, yes, I think that definitely plays. I definitely think all those things that we just mentioned plays a part. You know what I mean? I know we were talking before we started to tape, and I want to kind of get into this a little bit. And definitely all those things you said. And then one of the things we talked about, before was at some point, in my life, all those things, and I just felt disconnected as well, right? You'll hear people describe it, I felt like either better than or worse than. And that's kind of like how it was. It was just a disconnection. I always felt that lack of my comfort. You know what I mean? I felt a lack of comfort, and I found comfort in drinking and doing drugs. So I was missing some connection, and I don't know, especially at 15, 16 years old, my brain, though constantly running, can't comprehend that at that age. You know what I mean? But there was definitely something missing, and I was seeking some type of ease and comfort. And all of a sudden, have a Coors Light or two, And that mind that I talked about that was constantly racing, with 2 beers, it starts to slow down a little bit. And the best way I can explain it is I was able to exhale and just finally, breathe and relax.
Very well said, Dan. Here's what I'm assimilating from what you're saying. A very active brain, you're always thinking, a very, very active kind of person. I'm not sure ADHD is how you may categorize yourself. I'm a self-declared ADHD kind of person. But my brain is always going in different directions, and Marty will tell me sometimes, hey, focus, focus, focus. I've got 19 things in my mind, but she will help me focus just on that one thing. But the aspect of being disconnected, that may be very important to our listeners and to Marty and me, that when you felt disconnected and you're always thinking of different things, that could have been, and I'm not trying to talk you into believing what I'm about to say, but that could have been some pretty large aspects of your previous life that led you to a life of drug dependency. Is that in any way accurate?
Yeah, I definitely think that's accurate. You know what I mean? Because with that connection and that constant searching, searching for that, not that I wasn't loved. I don't want to, that's not what I'm talking about. But as you're searching for that connection, and you find it, and all of a sudden, whether it be, 2 pills, maybe a little bit of cocaine, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you reach for that connection and you find it and it works. And what you want to do once it works, I want more, I want more, I want more. But back to what you said, self-described, self-diagnosed ADHD, sure, probably, you know what I mean? But then I'm progressing from 15 and 16, self-diagnosed with whatever I can and whatever doctor will see me to get whatever prescription I need at the same time. You know what I mean? So, there's a little bit of persuasion and con artist in me as well. If you're going to give me an inch, I'm going to take 3 miles.
I want to try to take you back mentally, Dan, and with no attempt to denigrate anybody, to blame anything on anyone. I think you would probably say that you're responsible for all your decisions. However, you've been very eloquent in describing your past, who you are. If there were anyone like Dan that we're dealing with right now and has some of the traits you described, I want to ask you, Dan, based on your life experience, is there a possibility that we can effectively engage with, and I'm talking about developing a very strong relationship, it's got to be mutual, but if I earn your trust and I prove myself to be worthy of being your friend and so forth, maybe back when you were 12, 13, or somewhere in that point, is there a possibility, this may be an unfair question, that relationship could have helped you avoid some of the decisions that led to your prior life?
Man, that's a really good question, and I don't think it's unfair at all, because I think that, to each family, who's hit with addiction, right, has probably asked themselves that exact thing. They probably went down that rabbit hole. And it's such a very fair question, and I don't know an honest answer. And I think if I told you one way or another, I'd be lying to you either way. Do I personally think that there was a time that I probably could not have ended up the way that I did? Yes, but I don't know where and when I crossed that line. You know what I mean? I can tell you that I did have people in my life, like my grandfather, for example, who was a very big role model and somebody I aspired to be, and I did have that connection with. So I can tell you that I did have that person in my life. I don't know, however, if that would have been enough to stop me. You know what I mean? I don't know if that would be enough. I do know, though, I think it's very important, and we talked about it on the front end and connection and things like that. I do think it's very important whether or not, an individual crosses that imaginary line of whether they can and can't, be addicted. I do think it's very important, regardless of what they say, to have those people to support you in their like moving forward. You know what I mean? So I definitely think it's a fair question, but I don't think it's something I can honestly answer one way or another. It's so tough. But I can tell you I did have those people in my life, and I don't know if it was enough to stop, but I do think for people to get better, you have to have those type of people in your life. So even if they do cross that imaginary line, they're still going to need that love and support to help them get better.
And that's a great segue, Dan, that, yes, and I do appreciate the fact that it's just almost too difficult to answer a question like that, thinking back that how things could have been. Here's my assumption. There's nothing negative in developing a very meaningful relationship. And if we determine that if we show this person that we genuinely care for Dan and others, that there's nothing negative in that. And again, with that relationship, I have no intention of labeling, stigmatizing, or otherwise falsely accusing you. However, establishing that relationship so that you and I can talk at a very, let's just say, trustworthy level, I think could be positive. But now, you're into drugs and alcohol and so forth. Is there an aspect of friendship and trust that you felt you needed to be able to recover, albeit it could take another 10, 15 years to recover? And I think what I'm asking, Dan, is, in hindsight, did you just need to know that we're always going to be with you on the, I'm going to use the term, other side of when you make the choice to stop doing what you did and recover?
My long pause is because I'm thinking. So here's what I can tell you about the relationships. I can tell you that there's about 6 or 7 of us, of my high school friends, that I consider my brothers, right? I have sisters, fantastic. I love them to death. I don't have any brothers. But I've been friends with these, 7 guys for probably, I'm 40. I've known them since I've been 13. What does that make it? 25, 27 years? So I don't know if I could have, if I didn't have their support, right, I probably still would have gotten sober, and I'll explain how I got to that point. But definitely there was a part of their support that, towards the end, man, all of a sudden I stopped getting invited to their family birthday parties, right? And I'm not being invited to their kids' parties, and I'm not getting invited to their housewarming parties. You know what I mean? So what I can tell you is this. When I got sober, I was totally dreading the fact of coming back into the group, okay? Because I felt that I let them down. You know what I mean? They're, for not blood, but they're my brothers. We're all in each other's weddings. We all stood up and gave each other best man speeches at all of our weddings. They're my people. They're my brothers. And I definitely was concerned when I got sober, how are they going to feel? Are they going to be okay? You know what I mean? With me not drinking and stuff. And what I have come to find out is not only were they warm and welcoming and took me back with open arms, they were staging their own intervention process behind my back without even knowing. Them people were ready to step up and step in and get involved and say, Dan, what are you doing? You're not the person that we became friends with. And they were planning an intervention behind my back. That's how much they love me, with my family and stuff like that. So I think eventually I would have been sprung towards recovery anyway, because I had overdosed, and we can talk about that when we get down there. But there was some concern about whether or not, but man, did them dudes rally around me, and it wasn't awkward. We talk about judgment and non-stigmatizing and stuff like that, and there was none of that. To a man, they all looked me in the eyes, and they told me they loved me, and they said, we just wanted our old friend back. So I don't know if I would have been able to maintain it without them, but I was thrust into it without them, because I thought I was alone and I had to do it by myself. But, man, knowing that on the back end and knowing that, they just loved me for being me and that they just wanted their boy back, that went a long way.
What I'm hearing as a part of your recovery, some people use the term that they had to hit rock bottom. What I'm hearing from you is you had a need for acceptance, connected relationships, and so forth. When you weren't being invited to birthday parties and so forth, was that a part that maybe the depth of your dependency Were you able to still process that in a way that, well, gosh, I'm not accepted and I at some point have to stop what I'm doing? Is that a part of that connection that led to your recovery?
No, absolutely not, to be honest with you. It actually fueled me to probably keep going and to keep drinking and stuff like that. Though it hurt at the time, like I thought they were the crazy ones, to be honest with you. I thought that they were the crazy ones, settling down, buying houses, getting married, I thought they were crazy and they were suckers. I thought my lifestyle was way better than what they were doing. Like I'm like, what are you guys doing? You're 25. You guys are buying a house. Like, I'm at some seedy bar in some horrible part of town, thinking that I got it going on. And here, realistically, so no, I was oblivious to it. I just know that, they stopped wanting me around, and I thought it was their fault, not mine.
Wow. I'm intrigued with your life and how you describe that. If there was a turning point, Dan, what was that?
So the turning point was I'm 31 years old. I got kicked out of my apartment, and I'm bartending, and I got fired. And at this point, I knew that I needed to get help, and I just couldn't get there myself. Okay? Now, I have a sister. She's younger than me in age, but she'll celebrate 15 or 16 years of continuous sobriety this year as well. And you would think with somebody who was in my family who has already been sober, I could have reached out and said, hey, man, that's why it's so important that you talk about that connection on the front end, because when that moment of willingness comes, they want to make sure they have a trusted person to talk to. That's why it's very important for you to have that connection that you're discussing and engage with that person on the front end. But we'll get back to that. What happened was I was living at home with my mom and my grandma at my grandma's house. And, again, I had known that I needed help, but I just couldn't ask. And I eventually went and got, I had gotten some drugs. I had gotten some Xanax. And I had overdosed. And the way it's explained to me is my mom and grandma, I got back to my bedroom, and my mom and grandma had heard a big thud on the ground, right, a big thud. And they came running into the room, and they found me on the ground, white-faced and blue-lipped. And though it sounds horrible, without that moment, I'm not here today, right? Because what it did, it left me alone with the truth about who I was and about this jumping-off point about what I was going to become. So that's what actually propelled me. And we talk about, like, this God moment, and God really kind of just stepping in, really doing for me. I'm unable to physically do it myself. So, I had to have, somebody step in and force me to choose, for lack of a better term.
No, that's good. Marty and I are faith-based. You mentioned God, and for our listeners, would you say that belief in God, faith, was a big turning point in your life, or at least if that wasn't the rock bottom point, but that is what helped you come out of the addiction life and to be the 9 years free that you are?
So we talk about a connection, right? And especially in recovery, taboo, God, not God, whatever. For me personally, yes, I needed to get connected. We talked about being connected to drinking and drugs. And if I was going to get rid of that, I needed to search for a different connection. You know what I mean? And,
yes.
I found that connection, and I can tell you, looking back at my life, I probably had God walking beside me the entire time, having no clue. Raised Catholic, my idea of God growing up is not the same God that I've come to know in my heart today. You know what I mean? And it's just about this connection that I've discussed throughout the podcast. It's about this love in your heart. You know what I mean? And what happens is as you're putting these substances in your body and you're trying to fill the void, right? Your heart gets a little darker and darker and darker. And as I've gotten sober and I'm able to peel away at those things, and all of a sudden that light is able to hit my heart again. Where I can be a brother, I can be a father, I can be a son, I can be a husband. So I definitely think that for me personally, it's different for everybody's experience. But yes, God, the connection has definitely played a huge part in me being able to turn my life around.
There are a lot of us, Dan, who would say that I knew about God, but I didn't really have a relationship with God until sometime later in life. And it sounds like possibly that's what you're describing.
Yeah, 100%. Being raised Catholic, God was vengeful. If you did this, then this would happen. If you did this, then I didn't know about the all forgiving, or maybe, it was taught and I just didn't hear it. Yeah, I think what you just said was spot on.
And some of us were raised that, yeah, God is a loving God, but boy, you do something wrong, and you just know you're going to get whacked. I mean, there is a punishing part of God, and some of us were raised that way, and gosh, man, there are things that I would never confess because, boy, I don't want God's punishment, and that's what is forefront in our mind at times.
Yeah, 100%. But again, looking back on it, man, there was definitely, for all intents and purposes, and what I'm about to say may be blunt, for without, I tried to kill myself without really trying to kill myself. You know what I mean? There was never a wholehearted, suicide attempt. But, man, if I just did enough to maybe not wake up the next day, that would have been okay. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's a rock bottom, but that's the lows of where it gets, and it's not having the courage to kill yourself, but, having enough. Man, if I just took enough or drank enough and you want to talk about, spiting God, and then, God forbid, you wake up the next morning and it didn't work, and then you have to do it all over again. But to look back on my life and say that there wasn't some type of, godly intervention or somebody would just be a lie from what I believe at 40 years old now.
Thank you for articulating that, Dan. Let me transition only slightly. For those listeners who are saying that to some form or fashion, drugs are an epidemic, they're a huge problem. Can you, based on your life experience of what you've been through in your 9 years of being clean and free now, and what may be just some very full of wisdom hindsight, for those of us who are looking for a call to action, what can we do perhaps right now to help stem the epidemic indulgence in substance abuse? Can you suggest some things that we can do to help those on the front end and the back end?
Yes, great question. First and foremost, age-appropriate education, okay? I think in 2021, even so here's the thing. When I got sober in 2012, that's only a 9-year gap, right? July 9th, 2012, that's only 9 years. But even 9 years ago, right, my family was, when I had overdosed, my family was afraid to call an ambulance because of the stigma attached to it, right? And it's not 1960 anymore. You talk about an epidemic. I mean, you turn on the news or you open the newspaper and it's everywhere, right? If it's not the lead story, it's the second lead. It's the second lead story. Fatal overdose here, car crash over there. It's everywhere. So I definitely think age-appropriate conversations and just bringing awareness to it. It's not 1960 where, Uncle Joe's drinking again and we need to sweep it under the rug. I think age-appropriate awareness is definitely one of the keys. And then I think back, one of the themes we've been talking about this connection and what can you do on the front end is whenever you're having a conversation with somebody who's in the throes of it, right, who's in deep, understanding that they are human and not to come at them from a place of judgment, right, to come at them from a place of love, to let them know, hey, what you're doing, it's upsetting and it's hurtful, but I will always be here to help you. And letting them know, and look, they may never come for that help, okay? But you'd rather come from a place of love and that person say, if that moment of clarity comes, they know they have a trusted resource to go to say, hey, look, I know Ron's going to help me, even though I told him to F off 15 times. When they have that moment of clarity, you want to make sure that line of communication between you, Ron, and whoever it is that's addicted is open. As opposed to what happens is, if you come from a place of judgment, and all of a sudden now the person who's in the throes of addiction feels that they can't go anymore. They feel that they can't open up. And instead of opening up and having a trusted resource to come and say, hey, I'm ready, I need help, now they keep it inside, and who knows, maybe they die, right? So those are two things that I would say right at the beginning. Don't be afraid to talk about it. It's 2021, man. Let's open up dialogue. Let's have conversations about it. Hey, why isn't Uncle Dan at the party again? Well, Uncle Dan is sick, right? That's what you say to a 5-year-old. Uncle Dan's not going to be able to because he's sick. Having age-appropriate conversations, and then dealing with the actual addict, just making sure that you come from a place of love anytime you're going to talk to them and not from a place of judgment.
Well said, Dan. Does RCI offer courses for those of us who want to effectively engage in age-appropriate conversations that maybe some of us listening to say, yeah, Dan, I hear what you're saying, but I don't even know what is age-appropriate. I'd like to learn, but does RCI offer courses that can help us?
So, yes, RCA definitely offers courses. We actually have family programming. It's called Seeds to Recovery. That's for any family, and it's available every weekend where we have, for lack of a better term, family groups on how to deal with these exact issues that we're talking about. Absolutely.
Final question. Do you feel you can engage in social parties, socializing where there's drinking and or drugs, and you can just participate socially, recreationally, or has your past life been such that I can't even be in that kind of environment?
Ron, man, that's a hot button issue. So I'm going to tell you this, right? For me personally, I did not get sober to live this lifestyle, to not live my life, okay? You're going to get differing opinions, but for me, here's how I see it. I want to walk my life a free man, right, free of all things. And what that means for me is, if my buddies are getting married and they're going to serve alcohol at the wedding, I talk to you about my friends standing by me. All of a sudden, am I going to turn my back on them because they don't have a drinking problem and they can drink responsibly and me not show up? No. So for me, in my experience, you're going to get different answers to this question depending on the individual that you talk to, right? But for me as a free man, knowing that I am walking in the hand of God, me and him are hand in hand in this, there's a deal I make for him. And one of the things I do is there's a deal that I made with God, and it's very simple. I'm going to help another fellow who is struggling with drug addiction or alcoholism. Okay, that's my end. That's the work I'm going to put in. And what God is going to do for me is he's going to keep me safe and protected from any type of those temptations. Okay, so the short answer is for me, I feel totally comfortable being out and about in social settings. My wife drinks. Again, she doesn't have a drinking problem. So I'm not going to ask her to change her life. It's my issue to deal with. But that's the deal I made with God. I'm going to help fellow people try and get better. And what he's going to do for me is keep me safe and protected.
What I heard you just say is you are very aware of who Dan is, what you can and cannot do. You have the freedom to do whatever it is you choose to do, but you know where your limits are. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. And like, what am I doing? So realistically, it boils down to what am I looking to take from the situation, or am I looking to add to the situation? You know what I mean? And, the way I break it down for you is, again, my friends stood by me, and there's an amends process, throughout this recovery thing. If you're in any of the 12-step fellowships, and one of the amends that I make to my friends, and one of the deals that I made with them is I didn't get sober for one of them to die. And what I mean by that is, just be, my role is for them is when I'm out, I make sure they get home to their family and to their wives and their kids safe. So when we go out, I'm always their designated driver. That's the least I can do for them, you know what I mean, for supporting me through 15 years of hell.
If I were talking with one of your friends, is it likely they would say the old Dan that I knew is back, or is Dan permanently affected to where Dan is only 90-95% of what Dan used to be?
I don't think they would say either. I think that they would say that, man, I don't think that they're going to say their old Dan was back at all. I think what they're going to say is the Dan that we knew he could become is finally here.
I love it, Dan. I love it. We've got the new Dan talking with us, and Dan is living a totally new life, and you have learned the best from the past, and you're living a new life. That's what I'm hearing, Dan.
Yeah, 100%, man. And look, people ask me all the time, like, would you go back and change anything? And I guess to, like, somebody who's not affected by this, me saying no probably floors them. But I can tell you, if I go back and change anything in life, then I'm not the person I am standing before you, right? And I definitely feel that I had to go through those things to come out the other end the man I am today. So, no, I wouldn't change anything, because if I the butterfly effect, you know what I mean, where it could change the whole course. If I change anything, then I'm not the man. Then, Ron, who knows, maybe me and you aren't even sitting here speaking today. So, no, I wouldn't change anything, because I wouldn't be the man I am today.
And that is very well said, Dan. And to a degree, some people may think, well, that's unfortunate. Well, it's just some of us have to live and experience what we have to be who we are. And, Dan, that's what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah, 100%, man. Yes, 100%.
Dan, you are very inspiring. You are an upbeat. I love talking with folks like you. I would hope that your mind is continuously going and on and on and on. You're thinking of things. To me, that is a very positive aspect of a mind that's always clicking, always having ideas.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's just going in a different direction now, and instead of going, what will people think of me if I do this or that, it's my mind now goes to, who can I help today, and where can I induce change?
Great. That is servant leadership. How can I, based on my life experience, help someone else? Man, I love that kind of attitude.
No, why? Thank you, Ron. I had a blast today. It was a good talk.
Thank you, Dan. Our listeners are going to benefit from this, and thank you very much for sharing.
Dan, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
You said you went in with your friends that still drink and maybe do drugs, that you have made a promise to God that you're not going to do that. And so I think of Paul in the Bible, where he said after he preaches, and not that you're preaching, but after he preaches and he comes down, he does not want to be disqualified as a man of God. So that's what I thought when you said that, and I do appreciate that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny, you bring up, like, my friends and the drinking and the drugs. And, it's crazy is, looking back on it, man, and, again, in hindsight, always 20/20, right? They could drink on Friday and Saturday and get up and be a family man on Sunday, and they could do things on a Sunday. Man, if I went out drinking on a Friday or Saturday, it became Thursday real quick. You know what I mean? Like, man, all of a sudden my Friday night just turned into Thursday, and I'm like, again, I had talked about, like, them being suckers, and, man, I thought that they were wrong. They were living this life, just peaceful life, that I just, I had no intention of, but, talking about, like, disqualification and God and stuff. Thank God I found my path.
Yes.
Because I wouldn't be here today without it.
Right.
Dan, thank you so much for sharing. That's a great, inspiring story.
Anytime, guys. Thank you for having me.
What are your thoughts about drug and alcohol dependence? We are in a state of our economy, a state of time where it appears that drug and alcohol addiction is almost at the epidemic state of being. What's the reason for this? There are some people who would say that they have various insecurities, they have various needs. It seems that almost everyone who has gone the route of chemical dependency has been involved in some form or fashion with a need for relationships, a need to belong. They feel disconnected, perhaps not knowing exactly where they are, how they fit into local groups, and are they accepted. Some form of that seems to be at the root of much of the alcohol dependence, the drug addictions that we're experiencing. But I'm very interested in your insights. Perhaps you have been a parent, grandparent, friend of a loved one who has experienced alcohol addiction, drug addiction, anything of that nature. How did you help them through it? Possibly, how did you help someone avoid getting into that state of dependency? We're interested in knowing your thoughts. How can we work together to collectively defeat what is happening in the neighborhoods that seem to be all around us? Dan explains that, yes, he is seeing in his work in Recovery Centers of America is that there is an increasing intake in these centers where they're helping people over various forms of dependency and helping them to renew their life. As Dan said, he's a new person. And he's a new person because he's free of the past, not only the drug and alcohol dependency, but for him, he has a new life. He has a new purpose. He has a new why for being who he is. He is dedicating his life to helping others avoid and to overcome dependencies that can control people's lives. I'm very interested in knowing what your thoughts are, and if you have experiences with this, if you have different ideas that Dan in this podcast have not mentioned, please bring those up. One of the things that is very prevalent in dependency is the need for relationships. Marty and I have created a digital relationship program that is dedicated to dating into marriage, but it has to do with selecting the right person to become meaningfully interacting with, leading possibly to dating, marriage. And what we do is approach this from a personality perspective and selecting the right person that has a personality that, albeit is very different from yours, as Marty's is from mine. We are complementary to each other's very different personalities. Can you be certain that you are dating and looking at the correct person and you're compatible for a lifetime? We hope that we can help you with this by reviewing our digital relationship course. Let's engage together. Call me at 410-586-1875 or send an email message to Ron at thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. Let's engage each other in some thought and be able to think through and think into this such that we can add value to people. We hope this podcast and other similar podcasts are worthy of a 5-star rating. We hope that you will give us that and give us any feedback in a way that would make these podcasts more meaningful to you. So let's engage with each other. Let's reach out to others and add value to those who need the value that we can add to them. We look forward to working with you.
Throughout history, apples have changed the world. Newton's apple led to the discovery of gravity.
Gravity?
William Tell shot an apple off a guy's head for some reason. But now, the geniuses at Fireball are using apples to launch their delicious cinnamon whiskey into a new era. Introducing new Fireball Blazin' Apple. Taste history in the making with Fireball's new flavor, Blazin' Apple.
Please drink responsibly. Whiskey with natural cinnamon flavor, 33% alcohol by volume, produced by Sazerac, Louisville, Kentucky.